From the dawn of human history through the rise of civilizations, the impact of trauma has been a constant companion. Understanding the evolution of PTSD and its effect on children unveils a complex tapestry of human de-evolution and planet destruction. In prehistoric and agricultural societies, trauma exposure was a part of daily life. Injuries, wild animal attacks, childbirth risks, and inter-tribal violence were common. However, there was no formal recognition of PTSD. Trauma was likely dealt with communally through rituals, storytelling, or spiritual practices. Children were highly exposed to violence and survival stress, learning early from male figures that emotional suppression equated to strength. Intergenerational trauma was likely passed through behaviors and cultural norms, even though it wasn't yet medicalized. As ancient civilizations emerged, war and domination became central to power. Male-led warfare was the norm, and though PTSD was unnamed, ancient texts described symptoms consistent with it, like the nightmares in the Iliad. Sons were trained for war, while daughters were trained for obedience. Exposure to violence, slavery, and rape was normalized in imperial households. Emotional trauma was invisible, as strength was equated with stoicism, a male-coded value. The medieval and feudal periods brought their own forms of trauma. Hellfire teachings, sexual shame, witch hunts, and corporal punishment were prevalent. Male dominance was enforced with fear and guilt. War and crusades exposed men to horror, and their unprocessed trauma was often inflicted on their families. Children's mental health suffered under rigid hierarchies and abusive discipline. Girls' trauma was often internalized as shame and silence, while boys were trained to suppress emotion and mimic dominance. Colonial violence, slavery, genocide, and conquest traumatized entire populations. Trauma from colonial violence passed across generations. Children in colonized societies are exposed to violence, racism, and forced labor. Male heads of household are often authoritarian. Emotional neglect or abuse normalized under patriarchal family structures. Urban trauma, child labor, poverty, overcrowding, and abuse. PTSD in soldiers was called shell shock during World War I. Boys were sent to factories or mines, while girls were often sexually exploited or forced into servitude. Patriarchal norms still framed trauma as weakness, leading to silence and shame. After World War II and Vietnam, PTSD became medically acknowledged in the 1980s DSM. Fathers returned from war with trauma, often emotionally detached or abusive. Veterans' trauma linked to increased domestic violence and emotional neglect. Sons of traumatized men often repeat emotional suppression. Daughters inherit anxiety and hypervigilance. Boys are still told to man up. Girls are often forced into caretaking or silence. New forms of trauma, school shootings, cyberbullying, sexual abuse, domestic violence. Many stem from toxic masculinity, authoritarian parenting, or emotional neglect. Children's mental health today, increased anxiety, depression, and PTSD diagnoses. Still a stigma, especially for boys, around vulnerability. Intergenerational trauma persists in communities shaped by war, oppression, or poverty. Political figures and corporate leaders often promote LOA ideas, subtly reinforcing the narrative that success is a personal choice while disregarding broader social issues like economic inequality or systemic oppression. Strategy is especially evident in motivational speeches and corporate training programs that emphasize success as the result of mindset, misuse of Buddhism, and deeper PTSD evolution. Era, male power expression, source of trauma, and impact on children. Prehistoric physical dominance, hunting, violence, survival stress, learned fear, and emotional suppression. Ancient empire building, war, patriarchy, war, slavery, abuse, normalization of violence and obedience. Medieval religious control, strict hierarchy, guilt, corporal punishment, psychological repression, and early anxiety. Industrial authoritarian fatherhood, labor, child exploitation, family violence, emotional neglect, and PTSD. Modern global war, capitalism, colonialism, combat trauma, systemic oppression, inherited trauma, and shame culture. Contemporary toxic masculinity, instability, abuse, bullying, gender norms, and rising mental health crises in youth. Same strategy and target, Children and the ones male are supposed to protect. Different tactics, powerful and deeply relevant evidence-based insight of modern male-coded ideologies, a kind of new-era patriarchy, cloaked in progress and individualism, but still rooted in domination, extraction and ego. Let's unpack and expand this into a structured, coherent picture of how it affects society, mental health and the next generation. Core beliefs of the modern male dominant system, framed as wisdom but rooted in toxic individualism. Get rich or be nothing. Success equals wealth regardless of how it's earned. Hustle culture, constant productivity and self-exploitation equals masculinity. Nature is brutal, so be the alpha, misusing animal analogies to justify dominance. School is for sheep, devalues education, especially anything that doesn't lead to profit. Others' suffering is your opportunity. Normalizes exploitation as smart business. Robots are the future, children are the fuel, children are groomed as economic inputs. The law of attraction, another 5G ring tool, personal empowerment ideologies, co-opted to promote a self-centered approach to success. This aligns with larger power structures by focusing on individual achievement while downplaying or ignoring collective struggles and the need for systemic change. It can prevent mass uprisings or organized resistance by convincing individuals that they are solely responsible for their circumstances. The law of attraction can foster a blame the victim mentality, making individuals believe that their life outcomes are entirely their responsibility based on their thoughts and attitudes. Capitalist manipulation. Hypermaterialism and the worship of wealth. Wealth becomes the sole measure of human value, soil and seed for corruption. Billionaires are idolized and can get away with anything, while teachers, nurses and caregivers are devalued. Consumerism becomes identity, debt, insecurity and burnout follow, toxic competitiveness. Relationships are framed as power dynamics, dating, business, even parenting. Emotional intelligence is seen as a weakness. A winners versus losers mindset poisons collaboration, empathy and trust. Children as tools, not beings, pressured into academic or financial success, not fulfillment. Raised by algorithms, isolated by screens, trained for productivity. Childhood trauma from neglect, overachievement pressure and identity confusion. Neglect of the elderly. Elders are discarded when no longer useful economically. Cultural memory and wisdom are lost, replaced by digital trends. Aging is seen as failure, not evolution. Capitalism built on suffering, exploitation of the poor fuels the luxury of the elite. The gig economy, fast fashion, digital addiction, engineered dependence. Governments are often complicit or captured by corporate power. Evolution of PTSD into chronic collective trauma. Constant low-level trauma, economic stress, social media comparison, global instability. Children inherit anxiety, identity crises and lack of meaning. Self-worth is tied to external validation, leading to narcissism, depression and rage. In today's world, many power structures, corporations, political systems, elite individuals, violate the golden rule by prioritizing profit, control and power at the expense of the well-being of others, leaving karmic consequences to future generations. Elite, billionaires, CEOs, tech lords, alpha influencers, crypto bros, hustlers, middle class chasing relevance and status, children and workers feeding AI, profit media, exploited poor elders, environment and animals. Area, symptom, mental health, anxiety, burnout, depression, suicidal ideation, loneliness, family dynamics, absentee parents, performance pressure, emotionally unavailable fathers, education undermined, commercialized, replaced by hustle mythologies. Spiritual and emotional emptiness, nihilism, digital addiction, identity crises, planet climate collapse, ignored or exploited for profit. This so-called new male wisdom is not wisdom at all. It's a hyper-evolved survival strategy rooted in ego, fear and conquest, disguised as progress. It rewards sociopathy, punishes empathy and turns humans into cogs in a profit machine leading to doom of humanity.